standard and the trend that we're seeing across East Africa, especially when it comes to the safety of Kenyans in those two countries. And we're seeing a growing trend that Kenyans, or being Kenyan, is now almost being considered criminal once you cross the border into either Uganda or Tanzania. And we're asking the question, are we simply being used as scapegoats, or is there a reality that yes, we could be, to some level, meddling in the affairs of those countries?
Yes, that's a good question, but it needs to be understood in a historical context, in the sense that when you look at the three countries in terms of constitutional, civil society, and political sophistication and evolution, Kenya has gone the farthest, in the sense that courtesy of the 2010 constitutions, we are a real democracy, despite the fact that there is recent trends to reverse some of the gains under the new constitution. The constitution, of course, is intact, but you have seen very many laws being made to reverse those gains that have been made. These are the countries, like I said the last time, Tanzania remains the most backward, in the sense that their constitution is still largely the one-party constitution. Even these deeply flawed elections cannot be challenged in the courts. You saw Suluhu has effectively embarrassed even other African dictators. Like this thing of saying you are getting 98% of the votes. Nowadays, the trend has been you somehow get yourself declared as re-elected or elected if you are the incumbent, but letting the opposition, by and large, to win in the areas. So Tanzania remains seriously backward. But I also wish to say in favor of Tanzania that historically, a lot of Kenyan citizens, including Willy Mutunga, when they were facing repression at home, both during the time of Jomo Kenyatta and the time of Daniel Arap Moi, it is Tanzania that would give refuge to them, and for more citizens of Africa, so that one would say that even from the level of the fact that Mwalimu Julius Nyerere appeared to have been, despite the fact that he was a dictator like the others, in terms of upholding rights and freedoms, but from a Pan-African point of view, he actually accommodated people who were under repression and people he believed were fighting for a betterment of their own countries. But Uganda is a more troubling scenario in two senses. Even during the time of Jomo Kenyatta, Congo Karumba, you could hear people went to Uganda, they were killed under circumstances in which government officials or whichever other way were implicated. You could see people would go to Uganda to seek refuge. They would somehow be betrayed, and some of them had to run away from there. So Uganda, and the fact that they had the long civil war, the fact that it was won by Museveni through an armed struggle, a guerrilla war, was also more of a curse than a blessing, in the sense that although Museveni would later on wear civilian clothes, he remains essentially a guerrilla, a person who believes that ultimately it is the AK-47 that keeps him in power. And this would be remembered during the time that Kiza Besigye, there's some time he had defeated him in elections, and he wore the military attire and said that nobody can be permitted to declare, he can only leave the state house of Uganda through the gun, because it is not the people, it is the gun that put him in control. So that Uganda, by and large, remains also, Tanzania, they have had several changes of the presidency, but Uganda, by and large, remains a dictatorship, a military dictatorship in civilian garb. And this is why his son and Museveni, they talk, they're about putting Kenyans in the fridge. And to add now on that Kenyans are being put in the fridge and people are bragging about it. You read in the newspaper that the son of Museveni saying, it is only that President Uhuru Kenyatta, I respect him, so I agreed to remove him because of some of the call that he may have placed. So you actually see the betrayal, and Professor Macharia Monene wrote about it yesterday in the Standard. The first duty of the citizens of any government is to protect its citizens who are menaced abroad. But it would appear, and this is now when people say, probably because you cannot be able to count on the Kenya government to protect you, probably you should not be going outside Kenya for any reason. So that's a huge betrayal. And the huge betrayal starts at the level of the president. If you cannot be able to protect your citizens, and other dictators are bragging how your citizens are fair game for torture, for repression, it is really a letdown. The final position on that is this, that we are in East African community. When you're in East African community, you would expect you would have an association, solidarity at the level of our leaders, which appears to be now a trinity of repression, a trinity of dictatorship. But a true solidarity would expect that even citizens themselves, I can go to Uganda, we have the East African Law Society of Kenya, for example, like lawyers.
And that's what I wanted to ask you. Is that a route for a redress for any of those people who feel a bit repressed or probably mistreated in any of these countries?
Definitely it is. And yesterday, actually, a thought came across my mind, and I was wondering whether we can encourage the Law Society of Kenya to tell their colleagues in Uganda, because what happened to Bob Njage and his colleague is actually unconstitutional even under the Ugandan constitution. So I don't know to the extent to which Yoweri Museveni, or even if he doesn't get to Yoweri Museveni, the Ugandan government can actually be sued in Uganda by the citizens of Kenya because they were hurt in Uganda. And therefore this should help. But I insist that true East African community, if it would ever mean something, it must mean that at the higher level, the institutions of East Africa are working, the leaders are friends to each other, you attend each other's ceremony. But more importantly, on another level, that we must be seen to be closer to Ugandans and members of the East African community, probably more than the Egyptians. Otherwise, it means nothing, absolutely.
Yes. The other trend we're seeing, and I don't know, because probably that's what the Standard saw, is a trend where it would appear that there's a militarization of the governance structures. That's why we see a lot of these presidents. Probably it would look nice, and many Kenyans would like to see your president as a commander-in-chief wearing military fatigues. But according to this, it's also a trend, and it portrays something different as well. We've seen it happen. Of course, Museveni is a military man. In Tanzania now we saw the military take over very fast. We've seen this in Kenya as well. Do you feel that there's a risk in that to the democracy?